Well, hello there, and welcome to the Four Keys of Kabbalah. I am Rabbi Yisrael, and we are here to plumb the depth of meaning and purpose, going on a profound journey into the why we are here, and also how to deal with challenges of life. In our first session, we spoke about Kabbalah key number 1. Let's just review that before we get on to Kabbalah key number 2. So, Kabbalah key number 1 was basically the idea that everything that exists, the entire universe, exists by virtue of the divine word. In the story of creation, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The entire story of creation is actually a code. It is a spiritual programming of existence itself. And this divine word becomes the actual information that brings all of existence about, from the galaxies to the smallest subatomic particles. It all comes about by virtue of the divine word. And in fact, this divine word continues to create continuously and constantly. As we say in the morning prayers, that he renews the whole story of creation every single day. And this is true every day and at every moment. For if for one moment God would remove his divine light, his divine information, the words of creation, everything would go back to what preceded it, which was nothing, or just the existence of God. And this is one of the amazing teachings of Kabbalah, that any time we look at the world around us, we need to understand that there is a part of God inside of that. More importantly, when we look at our very own self, to realize that there is a part of God inside of us. When we look at another person, to realize that there's a part of God inside of them. And so the question becomes, how do we see it? How do we find it? How do we mine the divine that exists within ourselves and within the world? But it's all really the divine word that brings everything about. Now, we last left off with a question. Imagine a world where we could all see godliness. Right? Imagine, we brought the analogy last week of Starry Night, Van Gogh's Starry Night, beautiful painting. And on this painting, of course, he signed his name so that when you go to the Museum of Modern Art, you can see the beauty and you can see the artist. You can see the name, you know to whom to attribute this beautiful piece of art. Imagine if you look at the universe and you see God's name. God could have created the world in such a way where godliness would be readily perceivable, where we could see it, we could experience it. When we woke up in the morning, it would be just the most glorious experience, realizing that we get our soul back. Then when we looked at another person, to realize that they are an expression of the divine. When we look at everything, the mountains, the valleys, the cars, the people, the animals, everything, to realize that this is all just a glorious manifestation of the divine word. What kind of a world would that be? That would be so great. So what could be better than that, was the question that we left off with. The answer to this question, ladies and gentlemen, we will understand through taking a look at an analogy of two different types of teachers. One teacher, we will call her Ms. Lucentia. She is a master pedagogue. Her students come into her class and she lays out all of the information that they need to know before coming to the main point. When it comes to the main point, the main idea, she unpacks it piece by piece so that everyone could understand exactly what she is talking about. She is clear. She is a pleasure to listen to. She has diagrams and charts. She has models. She's using all of the modalities of teaching so that every student in her class will be able to experience the information on the level that's going to be best for them. And so after teaching this big idea, whatever the topic is, everybody in that classroom, all of the students have the information. They understand it. They get it. They can repeat it back to you. It is so clear to them. I'm sure we have all experienced some teachers in our life, maybe earlier on, maybe in the college years, but teachers who were just so lucid. The words were so clear that the topic came alive and we understood, we got the idea. What a great teacher Ms. Lucentia is. Now we're going to go to Mr. Kasher. Mr. Kasher is also a master pedagogue. However, he takes a very different approach. If there's an idea, the main idea, the big idea that Mr. Kasher wants to teach, right? He'll teach everything leading up to that big idea. He'll teach them everything they need to know. Mr. Kasher will give them the tools that they need to, in order to navigate the subject matter, to analyze it, to weigh it, to figure it out. But Mr. Kasher puts tremendous effort into concealing the big idea. What kind of a teacher is that? The main idea the teacher is coming to teach and he won't tell the class what it is? Who can tell me? You can put it into the notes. Why won't he tell them what the big idea is? He'll lead them up to it, but then he stops. So whereas Ms. Lucentia made it all so clear, she unfolded it, unpacked it, and made it as clear as day, Mr. Kasher specifically will not reveal what the big idea is. Why not? Some of you perhaps have already typed in. There's a little bit of a lag on Facebook. We'll find out soon. What is his game? What is he playing at? What Mr. Kasher is accomplishing, okay, very good, we see there. We have the idea here. It should be pretty clear to most of us. Mr. Kasher's class can be very difficult. It can be very challenging. It can be very frustrating because there's a point and he won't tell you what it is, and the student has to work until he or she can discover it on their own. They can find the idea so that it becomes their own idea. If I tell you a great idea, right, this is also a tip for master negotiators. If you go into a meeting and you tell everyone your big idea, people may like it, they may not like it, they may disagree. Whoops, sorry about that. I got a call in. So they might like the idea, they might dislike the idea. But what if you go in and you set up the meeting in such a way where one of the people who's making the decision comes up with that idea, his or herself? Then you have really won, right? Because it becomes their idea, right? So we all, of course, everybody likes their big idea, but when you can teach students in such a way where it becomes their own idea, right? The only way to achieve that is through teaching through discovery. Teaching through discovery means that they have to, well, what's rule number one for teaching based on discovery is that you have to hide the idea. If you reveal the big idea, the big concept, well, then no one's going to be able to discover it, right? You see, discovery is discover. So before someone can discover, you have to cover it. You have to conceal it. So Mr. Kasher's way of teaching was in such a way definitely more frustrating, definitely more trying. Definitely a person could really become very even upset with it. And how can I find this, right? Like when you're looking for something that you can't find, it's so hard. And you ever had that experience? You misplace something, you're looking for it, you can't find it. It is so frustrating. I mean, we've all had that experience. And you're blaming everybody, right? Where did this person put it? Where did that person put it? I can tell you where you put it. I can tell you who put it there, first of all, right? It's always yourself. You find it exactly where you put it last. That's what my wife tells me when I'm looking for something. She says, where are my keys? Well, where did you put them last? Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be looking for them. And of course, as they always say, right, you always find it in the last place that you look. But getting back to the subject matter here, okay, Mr. Kasher. So he has to hide it and he has to conceal it, right? We all know, even if we're looking for something, if we're trying to find something, the more difficult it is to find, the greater the joy once we find it. And if someone tells you a riddle, you want them to give you a few minutes to try to figure out the answer on your own. And if you figure it out on your own, wow, now it becomes, well, we'll get to that in a moment. There's a whole change, there's a whole shift in what occurs when you have this process. So let's go back to the two teachers. So Ms. Lucentia, when she teaches something, do the students get it? Do they understand it? Yes, absolutely. When Mr. Kasher teaches it, do the students get it? Do they understand it? Well, eventually, it might be a longer process until they do. What is the difference between the information taught by Teacher A and Teacher B? They both know the same thing. They both have the same information, but there is a qualitative difference in this information, and that is, with Mr. Kasher, you own the information. It is yours. Only when we find it on our own does it belong to us. That's why when you discover something, now it's yours. You are the owner because you discovered it. If you have a scientist that is discovering a cure to something and there's a certain element or there's a certain leaf that contains something that's going to be a cure, well, the leaf was there, the enzymes in the leaf were there, but someone has to uncover it and find the application. That discovery makes it theirs. They get the credit. And now here's the clincher. This is the only way that you can have meaning, value, and purpose. It is only when you get it on your own that becomes significant to you. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that very soon. Well, actually, we'll be getting to it a little bit more in the next session, in Kabbalah key number 3. But now, to answer the question again, to make it even clearer, we said earlier, what would be better than a world where godliness was apparent? The answer is a world where godliness is not apparent, where there is what we call concealment. And with that concealment, now we have to find godliness. We have to dig, we have to search. It's a daily process. And many times a day, we have that ability to look deeper than the surface, to find the godliness within ourselves, to find the godliness within others. And if it was apparent, what would we be losing? What would we be missing? The most important key, and that is the key of discovery. So now just a little bit about this concealment. So Kabbalah key number 2 is basically that the divine spark, well, first of all, this Kabbalah key number 1 is that everything that exists has within it a divine spark that brings it into existence. So God, everything is made up of godliness. Kabbalah key number 2 is that this divine spark that is within everything is always concealed. It's always hidden. So when we look at the world, it's very possible that a person could look at the world and not perceive godliness. This is a very, very common thing. In fact, every human being has within them, as we said last time, a part of God. This is their soul. And it's possible for a person to live their life without realizing that they have a part of God inside of them. It is concealed. It is not something that's apparent. How does everything become concealed? Kabbalah explains that that comes about through what is called klipa. Klipa means literally, a klipa means a shell. So you have a fruit, and you have around the fruit, you have a shell. So if there was no klipa in the world, when we looked at anything, we would perceive, I should say, the divine light inside of it. We would sense godliness in the world. Everything is created by God, and God is in it. God is bringing it about, as per Kabbalah key number 1. But God conceals it, specifically. So God's name is not written on the bottom of the painting. When we look at the world, we have to work hard. Some people need to look harder than others. In some situations, we have to look harder than others to find the godliness that is within the world. But this is the function of the klipa. And Kabbalah explains that there's two different types of klipa. The first type of klipa is a neutral klipa called klipat noga. So basically, all of the galaxies, the heavens above, the earth below, we have this neutral klipa, which makes it that we cannot perceive God. However, we are able to find the godliness within it and utilize it for godliness. So for instance, if you have an apple, so you look at the apple, you don't see God. Most of us do not see the divine when we look at the apple. It's concealed through the klipa. The klipa is, I'm not talking about the apple peel, that is the shell around it, but the spiritual klipa around it makes it so that we don't perceive God. However, we can elevate that apple. How do we elevate that apple? We take the apple, we recite a blessing over it, number 1. So when we recite a blessing over the food, we realize that there is godliness within it, and that is what we are accessing when we recite the blessing. We eat the fruit, and we gain physical energy from the carbohydrates, from the food that we're eating. So we gain energy from the food that we're eating. We take that energy and we do something positive. We do a mitzvah, right? So now we've taken the godliness from that apple and we have realized it, we have revealed it, we have elevated it, so that that apple now becomes incorporated back into its divinity. But it takes effort, it takes work. That's the idea of the klipa. Kabbalah explains that there's another type of a klipa. The first type of klipa, called klipat noga, is a klipa that we are able to elevate. We're able to take that, and using it the right way, we can elevate it directly, in a direct fashion, in an active fashion. Another type of klipa is called shalosh klipot hatameot, the 3 impure klipot. The 3 impure klipot means that it is obstructed. The godliness is obstructed in such a way, in such a strong way, that it cannot be elevated. It's not possible for you to partake of it and elevate it because it's a strong klipa. In the creation and bringing about existence, in order to bring about the necessary concealment that we have in the world, it was necessary to create this strong force of klipa that also exists in the world. Where do we find this klipa? This klipa surrounds anything that is prohibited in Jewish law. So, any food, for instance, if the Torah says do not eat, let's just take the pig, right? That's a very easy example. There are many other examples, right? So the pig has within it the shalosh klipot hatameot, the three impure klipot. So if one partakes of the pork, right, they will not be able to elevate it. Now, if a person has to eat it, there are certain situations where a person must eat it for their health. Let's say an example of starvation, right? So then actually a person is able to elevate it, and thus they would recite a blessing. But under normal circumstances, it is impossible to elevate this in an active way. And since you cannot elevate it, the Torah says, do not partake of it. That is the Hebrew word asur, means prohibited, also means bound. Asur means that it is bound to the negative. And if you imbibe something that is negative and cannot be elevated, it cannot be spiritually metabolized, it's going to remain in your system and remain a spiritual obstruction in your system. And so there are actually 365 negative commandments, many things that according to Judaism that are prohibited, and many times people wonder, why are there so many things that are prohibited, right? It's simply God telling us that this cannot be elevated. Work, right? Working for a living, that's a very Jewish thing to do. God willing, everybody will be able to return to their work. So work is a very good thing to do. And through work, we actually elevate the world. However, on Shabbat, working cannot elevate the world. Work on Shabbat is surrounded by the shalosh klipot hatameot, by these three impure klipot. Work on Shabbat cannot be elevated. It does not elevate you. It does not elevate the world. It brings it down. So the Torah is simply telling us, don't partake of this. Don't do work. Don't eat this food. Don't do these things, because these things you're not going to be able to spiritually elevate, metabolize, and make part of the system of godliness. So don't partake of these things. So basically, Kabbalah key number 2 tells us that there is something much greater than a world where godliness is apparent. Kabbalah key number 2 is telling us that better than a world where godliness is apparent is a world where godliness is concealed. Why? That brings us to Kabbalah key number 3. Kabbalah key number 3 is that every aspect of God is concealed in the world. It is not apparent, in order to allow us to discover godliness in the world. Through discovery, it becomes ours. We have ownership. And through ownership, this is the only way for us to have meaning, purpose, and value. So God could have given us a world where godliness was apparent and everything would have been amazing. It would have just been missing 3 things: meaning, purpose, and value. And so the very things that we encounter in life, the challenges and the fact that sometimes we can't figure out what's going on, we can't see God, we can't see God's purpose, we don't perceive the divine, right? It's concealed from us. We're in a state of confusion, we're in a state of anxiety, or we're frustrated or upset, right? Because godliness is concealed. That's exactly the place where we're meant to be, to break through the barriers, to find godliness within our own self, to find godliness within the world. And in so doing, you have discovered God. And since you have discovered God, you now have ownership. Or in the words of our sages, partnership. Because of course God created existence and brought about existence, but through your work of discovery, you also have ownership. If God is owner and you're the owner, so now you have partnership. So that's basically the idea here. But a partner, of course, is a part owner. So when we discover God, that godliness that we have discovered becomes ours. And thus we have the meaning and the purpose and the value. So what we look at in the world that drives us crazy, right, the concealment of God that can be so difficult at times, that's exactly what gives the world, not the world, it gives us, in a very personal way, it gives us our meaning. Let's take a look for a moment at the very first Jew. Who was the very first Jewish person? That would have been Abraham. Abraham was the first Jew. So why was Abraham the first Jew? There are many explanations that are given for this. Many, all of course, correct answers for why Abraham was the first Jew. I want to offer the following possibility: that Abraham was the first Jew because Abraham was the very first human being who discovered God. Right? If we look at the history, Adam knew God and had a relationship with God. Noah knew God. Shem, Noah's son, and Aver, his great-great-grandson, right? They all knew God and they had a relationship with God. Noah even had a covenant with God, a very strong form of a relationship between Noah, God, and the world. But what all of these people had in common is that they knew about God to begin with. They didn't discover God. Adam, look in the story of creation, well, God created him and started a conversation with him. Adam was intimately aware of his creator. Adam and Eve, they knew God very personally. Noah was taught about God from his grandfather, and the others as well. They were all taught, they all knew about God. Abraham, on the other hand, was brought up by a man named Terach. We talk about this in the Passover Seder. We say that, on the one hand, we talk about God taking us out of Egypt, but then we go back in history, we say, you know what? In fact, we started off as idol worshippers. Why? Because Abraham's father, Terach, was an idol worshiper. The Medrash tells us more than that. He actually fabricated. He was an idol manufacturer, right? Well, that's a Jewish thing, right? Jews got to make a living. Well, he wasn't Jewish, but in any case, he manufactured idols. He was a believer in idolatry. This was the environment, this was the society, this was the family in which Abraham was brought up, in a society of idol worship. And Abraham was the first human being who looked at the world and said, something's not right here. This worship of idols doesn't seem right. And he dug, and he analyzed, and he went deeper and deeper until he came to the discovery that there must be an entity that we cannot see. There must be this God who is everywhere and we can't see God, and God is there, and he started worshiping God before God even ever revealed himself to Abraham. So the question is, was God playing hard to get? The answer is, yes, he was. God plays hard to get for one reason, because we have the ability to find God. And when we do find God, now that becomes ours. We have ownership. That relationship becomes meaningful and significant. And our purpose in the world of finding God in a world that would otherwise be godless, a world where God would not be found, means that we are changing the world through our finding, through what we discover in ourselves, through what we discover in the world. So the fact that it's not apparent, and the fact that we have to work, the fact that we have to study, and we have to pray, and it's hard work. The Jewish work is hard work. That's a good thing. It's hard work because through the hard work, you become valuable. Does that mean that you have to do everything? No. You can even do one thing. You can make a blessing over a cup of water. You could make a blessing over food that's kosher, and thus do this very significant, very important Jewish work. Right? So it's very easy to do something, right? So Kabbalah key number 1 is that everything is in existence because of a divine spark that is within it. Everything is, God is in everything in order to bring it about. Kabbalah key number 2 is that godliness that's within everything is concealed. And Kabbalah key number 3 is that it is concealed in order for us to be able to reveal it, for us to find it in our life, to find it in ourselves, to find it in the world around us. And that is how we bring blessing to ourselves and blessing to the whole world. That is how we are able to live a life of meaning, purpose, and value. We'll continue next Monday. We'll continue with Kabbalah key number 3 and 4, and then finish off with some more applications of the 4 keys of Kabbalah. Thank you so much for joining us.